Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know there's some people who are still dialing in, but we do have a lot of material to try to cover in an hour. We're going to try to go quickly because we really want to answer as many questions as you might have. My name is Kristen Appold, and Jeffrey Albrecht is on with us as well. We're both going to be presenting here today, and we are with the Needs Analysis Unit, which is in the Division of Drinking Water. And we both work broadly across the Water Board on implementing the new SAFER program, which we'll highlight in just a bit. Today's agenda, we're going to give a brief overview of kind of, well, why are we even talking to you today? We're going to briefly provide an overview of the SAFER program, and then we're going to dig into the meat and potatoes, which is what is the new requirements for counties in submitting state small and domestic well data. We're going to talk about the process and the materials that Jeffrey have provided. He's going to walk you through them and answer any questions that you might have. And then if time is permitting, we'd love to talk to you about what our vision is for the future for this data submission and talk about a new database that we're building called the SAFER Clearinghouse. So let's get into it. This all started really with the human right to water passed in 2012. You know, every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water. The human right to water really helps spur a movement to identify those systems that are in violation. And you guys all know that the majority of our systems that are in violation or have water quality issues, you know, most of them are very small systems. 90% of our violations occur with water systems serving less than 500 connections. Now, recognizing this, Senate Bill 200 was passed in 2019, so very recently, which helped establish within the State Water Board something called the SAFER program. We call it the Safe and Affordable Funding for Equity and Resilience Program. This program, you know, again, is implemented across the Water Board, and the staff within the Division of Drinking Water are helping to really engage with systems that are struggling to meet the goals of the human right to water. What's really cool about the SAFER program and SB 200 is that it gave us a lot of new tools in the toolkit, if you will. But foremost among those tools really is a new pot of funding. It's called the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, which I'll talk about in a bit. But you know, the SAFER program within the Water Board is responsible for identifying those systems that are out of compliance or are at risk of failing. We have authorities for consolidation and helping identify regional solutions. We can appoint administrators, and we are providing technical assistance and capacity building services as well. But I want to focus on that Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. This was the biggie. The Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund provides the Water Board up to $130 million per year through 2030. That fund, it is required that the Water Board develop a fund expenditure plan every year to indicate how we're going to prioritize giving out that money, which supports construction. But it also is unique. It's one of our only funding sources where we can actually provide O&M assistance, and it specifically targets, you know, it's eligible domestic well owners, state small systems. So a lot of really great eligibilities for this new fund. SB 200 specifically requires that this fund expenditure plan be informed by something called the needs assessment. And the needs assessment has three components to it. There's a risk assessment, a cost assessment, and affordability assessment. We conduct a risk assessment to identify public water systems under 3,300 service connections, state small water systems, and domestic wells that may be at risk of failing or providing unsafe, inaccessible drinking water to customers or people. That risk assessment it takes many forms, and for some of you who may have been following what we've been doing over the last year, we've developed a risk assessment for public water systems, but we also have a separate approach for identifying at-risk state smalls and domestic wells. We have such different data on these systems that we've had to develop different methodologies for trying to do our risk assessment. We take the results of the risk assessment, and that list of at-risk systems and domestic wells is then added to our systems that are currently out of compliance, or our human right to water systems, or those who are failing. And we're going to come up with a big number of how much would it cost to actually provide solutions to all of those systems. We anticipate that there's going to be a significant gap, obviously, in funding available that the Water Board has access to, and then what it's actually going to take to help all of our at-risk and out-of-compliance systems. And then our affordability assessment, again, helps us with prioritizing or determining how we can assist those systems that we identify as at-risk or on the human right to water list. I wanted to highlight the risk assessment that's been developed for the state small systems and the domestic wells. The Division of Water Quality, the GAMMA unit, has developed an aquifer risk map, which is really identifying areas where the groundwater doesn't meet primary drinking water standards. So if you haven't seen this map yet, you should take a look at it. I think Jeffrey shared these slides. This map is live, but this is how we're currently using available data to identify those potentially at-risk state small and domestic well systems as part of our risk assessment. And if you're interested in learning more about the risk assessment for public water systems, visit our needs assessment website. We've got all the materials there. Why does this matter? The results of the risk assessment for our state smalls, domestic wells, and public water systems is, again, used to prioritize how the Water Board distributes technical assistance and funding. And so this is our priority pyramid. Obviously, the systems that are out of compliance, that are in real trouble right now, those are our highest priorities. And then we've got our at-risk water systems, state smalls, and domestic wells, and then potentially at risk and then not at risk. And then this is how it all kind of fits together. Our needs assessment, again, informs that fund expenditure plan, which helps with the prioritization and how we can target technical assistance and funding to those systems. But this is all, dependent on good data, when we're getting there for public water systems, but I think we have a long ways to go for our state smalls and domestic well systems. So I'm going to turn things over to Jeffrey, who's going to talk about the data side. Jeffrey?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to take over the presentation here now. Let's go to my computer. Let's see if this works. Okay. Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Good, good. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Kristen, for the overview of the SAFER program and the background on how the new state small and domestic well water quality data will be utilized for the needs assessment. Now I'm going to work on efficiently walking through the requirements and the process for submitting the data. Try to hopefully do it clearly and provide time to allow for some questions. Also want to acknowledge that if you have questions, feel free to hit the raise your hand button, and we welcome comments in the comment box here. And also welcome from our division. I see that Betsy Lichty has joined us and Wendy Killiu has joined us, and so I welcome them to chime in for any issues that are require clarification. And same thing for you all. If you have something that you're willing to highlight, feel free to unmute and chime in. Okay.
Jeffrey, are you advancing the slides? Because I just see the title slide.
I just advanced the first one. Not yet?
No.
Oh, phooey. 1 second. Let's try this again. Mm-hmm.
I think it's the same issue. How about I share my screen and I'll advance it for you.
Please.
Okay.
Okay. So we're still seeing your screen, yes?
Hopefully.
There we go. Okay, let's get back on track. Okay, so as you all should be aware, SB 200 also added Health and Safety Code Section 116772, Subdivision B, Parts 1 and 2. So for Part 1, it requires the historic water quality data submission for state smalls and domestic wells going back to 2014. You'll see it has that deadline of January 1st, 2021, which I will address shortly. Part 2 repeats the water quality data submission requirements, but beginning in January 22, the data must be submitted directly to the water board in an electronic format. So, of course, that electronic format is what will facilitate the direct import into our new SAFER Clearinghouse database. Okay, next, let's see. So, going back to the deadline, the January 1st, 2021 deadline defining the code is being shifted to a phased approach. So this was done in recognition of a few variables. First, it was essential to allow for us to develop the SAFER Clearinghouse as the repository for all this new data. The database will provide that foundation for accurate collection, validation, management, and utilization of water quality data for the needs assessment. And then, of course, we wanted to recognize the fact that COVID-19 has had significant impact on counties and their resources. But we believe this approach will allow you all to dedicate adequate time for the data collection and submission and to navigate this process. So definitions. So domestic well is defined in the code as water for domestic needs of an individual residence with no more than 4 service connections, and the state smalls is defined as the piped water for human consumption that serves at least 5, but not more than 14 service connections, limited to an average of 25 people or less. So if you have questions around the applicability of these definitions to the systems in your county and which ones should be submitted, please feel free to reach out for any additional clarification. Okay, so this is the phase schedule that for submitting the data that I mentioned. So it's being broken out into 4 phases over the next 4 months. As we discuss it, you will see that the phases are designed to build off the previous information submitted as each phase leads to the next. So going back to the email I sent to many of you back on December 31st, it included links to the first 3 files listed for phase 1. County contacts, state smalls, basic inventory, and domestic well facility inventory. So we would like to have that county contacts submitted by the end of this week if possible, and the state smalls inventory by the end of this month. The domestic well facility inventory has a longer 90-day window because identifying all domestic wells in your county is likely the most difficult component in this exercise, with hundreds or thousands of wells to submit. So I think it's important to begin exploring the collection and organization of that data submittal sooner than later. In phase 2, the state smalls facility inventory will define the specific components of the state small, such as the groundwater well and maybe a distribution system that is not part of the basic inventory. Together, this all leads to the establishment of a basic profile for each state small, so we can accurately associate the incoming water quality data with a specific sampling location. Phase 3 is when we want to receive the actual water quality data for state smalls. The data submittal will need to include a public water system ID for each system, plus a unique facility component extension on that PWS ID. I will discuss this more in the upcoming slides. So finally, phase 4 is for the domestic well water quality data submittal, matching the same process largely as the state smalls, but likely on a much larger scale. Okay. Okay, so as we begin to talk about these tables, I encourage y'all to possibly open up some of the spreadsheets posted on the website so you can kind of browse through them as we talk our way through. You can find them by using the website link in the appointment for this meeting. But so for each of these tables, these are also in the guidance document, and all the fields you see in this table are what you will see in the matching spreadsheet. So for this, we essentially want to build a context database so we know who we should be working with on the specific data needs, whether it's the state smalls or a domestic wells contact or both within your organization. And one point of clarification that I want to make. So in the spreadsheet, you will see that we use the local health officer terminology recycled from the actual SB 200 language. But I want to clarify that we now better understand that the local health officer is likely like a medical doctor within your county. So what we really want is the program directors and the environmental health specialists that are most familiar with the water systems and the data. So yeah, so key points. The first column you'll see in the spreadsheet is where you will select the contact type, which is going to be either state smalls, domestic wells, or both. Again, please provide the most appropriate contacts. That may be your environmental health director, staff such as the environmental health specialist. And you're also welcome to list multiple contacts on that spreadsheet. So you could have 4, 5, 6 people listed. Okay. Let's see. So first, I want to say, please note that for each of these spreadsheets, there is a second tab at the bottom of that Excel file with definitions for each field. So please feel free to refer there for some additional clarification on a definition. The state smalls basic inventory spreadsheet will provide the fundamental information about each state small, including the contact and locational data. So this basic information will be used to create a profile in the SAFER Clearinghouse. So this is the first piece of the puzzle. So please note that there are multiple columns with drop-down menu choices in these spreadsheets. In those cases, you will need to select from the available options. Okay. So some key points in this spreadsheet is that local primacy agency counties should have an existing public water system ID for each state small. And former LPA counties should also still have an existing PWS ID in their records. So please be sure to carry that information forward, that existing number into the table. For each state small that never had a PWS ID, one will be generated by the water board and shared with the county. So that ID will be essential for the subsequent steps in this process. The current activity status column is intended to identify the date the system was first permitted to operate. The feedback I have received so far is that accurate dates may be challenging for some counties. The data is valuable to us because it helps us understand how old a system may be. So I encourage you all to please do your best to provide accurate information. If you do not have accurate dates and need to estimate, please share that fact with me and share your process for determining those dates when you submit the spreadsheet. Okay. Let's see, the state small facility inventory. So it's going to build on that basic inventory. Highlighted, you'll see is the required ID that we need for associating this information in the SAFER Clearinghouse. So if you do not have a PWS ID yet, you will need to receive that number assignment from the water board before completing this table. Let's see, the facility name and type are going to be the components of the system. For a state small, it's likely only a well with the possibility of a distribution system. So each needs to be named and identified. The identification and location of the facility components is critical for mapping the water quality data associated with the system to know that a sample was taken from a well and where it is physically located. That's why we need these components identified and then linked with the basic inventory. Moving down the rows, the facility activity status will be either active or inactive, and the data is supposed to be, again, when it was first used to help us understand the age of the system. The drop-down menu for facility availability will offer you permanent, seasonal, emergency, interim, and other. Of course, it should just be permanent in most cases for these components. The next column is the treatment status. There may be some instances where state smalls have some level of treatment, so choosing the treated versus not treated must be identified. And if there is treatment, the next column, it'll need to be identified in the treatment type column by selecting from those available options. And then let's see, next we require locational data in the form of lat long coordinates. So that accurate data will be valuable for us, again, as we go through and look at consolidations and our needs assessments. Okay. Let's see. So finally, there's optional data requested regarding the well construction. This type of information is valuable to our groundwater risk mapping project and long-term evaluation of system needs. So if you can provide an OSCR number for the wells, then we are hoping that the well construction details can eventually be linked from the DWR database to our data. Okay, so key points, that PWSID must be used in the spreadsheet to link the facility components. The facility components will likely only be a well and maybe a distribution system. That facility component will be associated with the PWSID to create a specific water quality sampling location. And so that lat long and assessor parcel information will also be valuable for our regional evaluations and may facilitate a linkage with the OSCR number. And again, if you can provide that number, we are hoping to kind of eventually create a link to their database. Something that is not highlighted here is that so the State Water Board will need to assign a 3-digit number to each facility component. It will simply be a 001 or 002 extension on that PWSID. And that's what will also, that combination is what will be required for the water quality data submission. Thought I might have seen a hand go up for a second there. Is there any questions for our progress so far? Feel free to chime in now.
Hi, this is Amy Rutledge from Kern County.
Yes.
Just a question on the OSCR number. So we do, oh, I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we do require well logs as part of our completion process, but we don't log that anywhere in our database. It's just part of our electronic record. Would the expectation be that we go through and find those for you? I mean, we could add that as a component moving forward, but for the backlog of data, is that something that we would have to provide?
Well, currently that OSCR number is not a required field. But of course, yes, as we go through this, it's something that we would like to have. And I think getting it is valuable. So if there's a process, if you all could eventually get to it, that is something I think we would certainly like, and you could proceed with it maybe on a separate timeline.
Okay, thank you. I'm just looking forward ahead in terms of, you know, if this is a requirement for our domestic wells as well. I mean, we have a small subset of state smalls, which is what we're discussing now, but our domestic well database is huge. So,
okay. But yes, if you have a modest size state small list, then I would encourage you to try to go and do that linkage now. But understand that you know, for the domestic wells, it might be a much more lengthy task. But the more you can do now, the better. It's all appreciated. Okay. Shall we move on? Any other questions right now? Okay. How about next slide? Okay, so after establishing the basic profile for each state small, we will then be ready for the water quality data and properly linking it within the clearinghouse. So for this spreadsheet, we will need the PWSID plus the 3-digit facility code. You will see that in those tables, it's under column M is the primary station code, and that primary station code is the equivalent of the facility code. I may update that table to make the language consistent. So from there, the format for the water quality data should reflect a typical lab report. The minimum required fields for this will be the analyte result, the result units, and a collection date. You will see if you have the spreadsheet open that the analyte column in the template spreadsheet has a drop-down menu for the analyte options, and there are over 400 options there. So translating this information from your existing data must be done accurately, and make sure you're selecting the correct units. It may be time consuming, but it's going to be essential in order for us to accurately import the data for all these systems into the clearinghouse. Okay. As you will see, some of these fields are listed as required in the future. This is a reflection of the requirements for the data to be submitted directly to the water board, beginning from the labs beginning next January. So those are going to be required elements when that process starts. Okay. So the key points is that we need to have the combined PWSID and facility ID. The data must be accurately mapped over to the spreadsheets for import to the clearinghouse. The data fields should essentially reflect the format of a lab report. And I also wanted to highlight, going back to the process of getting this data onto the spreadsheets, that I have reached out to a couple of labs to discuss the availability of historical data. And they do typically maintain their data going back for several years. So I recommend you all potentially reach out to some of your local labs to see if they can still generate a machine readable data spreadsheet for the systems you're trying to populate data for. That may be a much more reasonable option if they're willing to do that for you. And if you want to discuss that option further, please let me know. Okay. So moving on to the domestic wells, you'll see that we need to establish a basic profile for each well, similar to the state smalls. So we will need a domestic well name, which is likely the name of a property owner or the name of an organization. We also need a unique identifier, which may be your own local numbering system, or it may be a permit number. As you can see from the number of potential well numbering and identification sources with Oscar, CASGEM, USGS, well permit numbers, that there is really no consistent numbering convention or overarching identification process. So through the SAFER Clearinghouse, we will be working towards unifying the identification system. And so we will begin by creating a new domestic well ID for the SAFER Clearinghouse to have one standard numbering system. So from there, we hope to connect the dots with other well data sources, existing identifiers, and ongoing future data collection. So again, if you can provide, excuse me, an Oscar number that we can link with the new domestic well ID, that will help us gather that that well construction details available through DWR. And moving on, we need look at the physical address for each well. It's a required element along with the activity status as active or inactive. Next slide. We have our treatment status and type question, if any, for a well that's required in the future. Let's see. And for domestic wells, the related regulating agency is going to simply be the county. So it is going to be your county organization is over that overarching agency. And again, locational data is going to be valuable for our consolidation projects, regional evaluations, and our aquifer risk mapping project. Okay. Key points. So we need to have a name for each well. The names may be repeated for multiple wells that you may have the same property owner, same organization, but we do need to have some kind of locally generated unique ID. Well permit number may be that best option until we can assign a SAFER Clearinghouse ID, domestic well ID to it. The lat longs and APN data will be valued again to facilitate a potential linkage with Oscar. And that domestic well ID will be generated for each well and then shared with each respective county. Let's see. So now with the creation of a domestic well profile in the clearinghouse and a new domestic well ID, we are now ready to accept water quality data in essentially the same format as the state smalls. So you'll see the same data fields are required here: the analyte, the result units, and a collection date. Let's see. So our key points, let's see. The new domestic well ID will need to be used in that spreadsheet. The data must be accurately mapped over again to the spreadsheet for import. Those data fields should mirror a typical lab report, and you may be able to get historic report lab data in electronic format directly through a lab to help kind of facilitate this process. So that was the overview of, I guess, of all the spreadsheets. Is there any questions that we have on this now? I debated whether to actually try to display the spreadsheets and work through them, but I think you have them all in front of you. So I would just encourage you all to look through them, and if you have specific questions, let's go ahead and we can try to work our way through them now. I see there's some more hands raised. Do you want to unmute and go ahead and ask?
Jeffrey, maybe you can call on folks.
Call on folks. Let's see. I saw Amy up there again. Amy, you want to ask yours again?
Yeah, I just had a quick question on the domestic well reporting. So, we have an inventory of, our wells that we drill, and then we have a separate identification for those that have been destroyed. When they're newer, it's easier for us to match up those two and make sure that they come off. Should we be doing that with ones that we know are inactive in terms of destruction, matching those data points together, or are we just sending everything we have? I mean, I have a database of like 18,000 wells, so.
I would say if you could make that linkage between ones that were previously active and since been destroyed, then no, we don't want those wells coming in, do we? No.
No. We're looking for the active wells.
Only active, so we can kind of continue to build and then link the water quality data with it as it comes in, from moving forward.
Okay, thanks. And then I know Elaine had something in the chat. I'm not sure if someone's monitoring that.
Let's see. We can go to chat next. I'm going to ask Gina. I saw Gina had her hand raised. So Gina, if you want to unmute and ask your question. Gina, unmute.
Maybe let's move on to the next. And Gina, maybe you can type your question in the chat box.
Okay. Next, I see Dylan Rowe has their hand raised. Dylan, you want to ask? Or ask in the chat box. Let's see. All right, maybe we'll move to the chat box. And Dylan, if you want to type your question there, might be easiest. Okay, so Elaine asked, what if a jurisdiction does not currently have a water quality program for domestic wells? Are we required to submit an inventory without water quality information? The answer is yes, you're still required to submit the inventory. We want to start to build that database in our, that inventory in our database, so we have it to refer to. There are, there are other sources potentially for water quality data that we can continue to kind of link to the wells as we in our inventory, and we want to know what's out there, even if you don't have in your possession water quality data. So it's important for us to be able to start to build that inventory. Again, as we look at doing consolidations or what is out there, it's going to be important for us to be able to put a dot on a map to know what exists. Okay, let's go back to the hands raised. Let's see, Dylan, did you want to try again? I think it's important to make sure you have just one thing unmuted. Otherwise, you're going to get that crossover of noise, that feedback. So Dylan, you still have your hand raised. You want to ask a question? Or do you want to type in the chat box?
Can you hear me?
There it is. There it is.
Okay, I have to use both my phone and Teams meeting.
Doubling up. So is this your question here?
Environmental health in Alameda County, we're a little bit of an odd county in that there are 4 well permitting agencies. Okay. Alameda County Public Works, Zone 7 Water Agency, Alameda County Water District, and the City of Berkeley. And environmental health does not have any role in permitting wells or collecting water quality data. So I want to make sure that you guys are reaching out to those 4 agencies because they are the agencies that track this data separately in their jurisdictions.
Okay, I'm going to make note of that. And so we need to work directly with those agencies for collecting the well data.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it is the most, I don't think it's a very functional organization for well permitting in this county, but it is what it is. And
as far as you know, is Alameda County the only one with that scenario?
I believe so. I believe environmental health departments have a role in permitting and in all the other counties.
Okay. Well then, good. We'll limit to you.
Actually, this is Martha with the Department of Environmental Health in Santa Clara County. We have Valley Water that does all the permitting of the well constructions. We assist in that.
Okay.
And this is
the actual permitting of.
There's Jason Flake with Placer County. We have some cities that do their own well permitting as well.
Okay. So I guess before we go too far down exploring this, I would recommend or at request that each county that has spoken up so far, if you could send me an email, I guess stating this situation.
Jeffrey, I think we lost you.
Okay. How do you hear me?
I can't.
Am I back?
You are.
Okay. Let's see. So I guess what I just said is if everyone who has a similar situation with multiple agencies issuing permits for wells, if you could send me an email stating that situation and identifying the additional agencies, that would be very helpful. I was going to move on to the other questions in the chat box here. So Benjamin Dolph, if there's no water quality data, what information can the local permitting agency provide that isn't already in the DWR database? Considering the sheer volume of data for many jurisdictions, wouldn't it be more efficient to link the state database with the DWR database? It would be ideal if we could do that. We are focused on domestic wells only here, and we need, this is supposed to be information that's coming from the local health officer falling to likely the environmental health department. So that data needs to come from the local health officer. That is the requirement in the code. So I guess we would like to make that connection, but the first step is we need to get that information submitted to us. So if that information can be pulled from DWR and then share with us, that's not. I mean, I understand that there is volume around the number of wells and the information. So we need to start with having that data come to us and working on popular data, and then from there we're hoping to kind of continue to facilitate that linkage, but in time. Let's see. Let's see if Ventura County is the same. EHD permits state smalls. Okay, moving on to our Vicki Jones. Will counties then need to submit lists of destroyed wells every time at a particular number of times per year so that it can be noted in SAFER and the aquifer map what information would need and how should that information be submitted? I think that we have language in the guidance that states that we intend to go through kind of like an annual review with each county. I kind of envision a potential for the inventory to be shared with the county and have a validation process. Given time, we can also hopefully explore the public-facing portal to the clearinghouse that Kristen's going to discuss. If we have time.
Vicki, I can try to address, if we have time, I can talk about what the next step is in terms of, you get the initial baseline data to us, and then how do we maintain it, which is a different process. So if we can get to that, Jeffrey, let's get there.
Okay. Let's see. Are there any guidance docs to download? If they have information to us already. I think the best approach, if you already, this is from David Allen is, if you already have information in SWS, I think the best thing is to use our spreadsheet and unfortunately to resubmit to us so we can go through it import process, because we do have this. When the data comes in, we're going to be going through an import process into the clearinghouse, and we don't have a cross connection with SWS yet, unfortunately. Let's see. Kings County does not permit or track domestic or private wells. Okay, we'll have to discuss that one further to see how we can find a resolve for that. Can your inventory be obtained from DWR if the jurisdiction does not have sampling plan or tracking wells with such detail? Yeah, domestic wells, this is new territory for us at the State Water Board in general. So we're still trying to figure out all the sources of information, what's available, what's a best approach for gathering this information. It's going to be a living, breathing process. So this is going to be an ongoing conversation. So with that being said, I don't have a clear answer for you yet. That's a good question. We're gonna track all these questions that are coming via the messaging here, and we'll work on trying to get some solidified responses. In the meantime, I'm going to keep browsing for questions here. Anything stick out for you, Kristen? Let's see.
I can't see the chat when I'm in presentation mode.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Let's see. This is from Christy Anderson in Trinity. I'm wondering the same as Carla. DWR has a GIS layer of all drilled wells dating back to the 60s. Yeah, so that's where we would like to be able to leverage the data in their Oscar database.
Hey, Jeffrey, I think I can say something to this. So, please. The Water Board, we've had multiple conversations with DWR over the year about this effort because SB 200 is pretty specific about counties providing this data to the Water Board directly. But we hear you. I mean, if we could get it elsewhere, we would. DWR's data systems are, similar to ours in that some are fairly old, and it's difficult to extract data or to connect it to our systems. So we're still exploring the technical feasibilities of doing that. Some of the challenges with a lot of this historical well data that maybe DWR has is that Sometimes it's not clear whether or not the well that was drilled is actually a domestic well and is used for domestic well purposes. Oftentimes they don't have contact information or other data that's required, at least on our end, for in order to appropriately map the water quality data that we're going to be getting eventually for these wells. So there's a lot of difficulties there, but we are coordinating with DWR. We will continue to coordinate with DWR and explore data sharing opportunities and connecting our systems so that we can really reduce the reporting burden that we understand this to be. So we're going to continue to explore. If you have ideas or would like to help us think through some of that, just please contact Jeffrey. We'd love to think through what our options are. But this, at least for right now, is the best path forward that we see in order to help counties comply with the requirements in SB 200.
Thank you for the summary, Kristen. I'm just going to bring the comments to a close. I'm just going to clarify that, again, we're going to make note of all these questions in the chat, but I want to allow time for Kristen to kind of talk about the next steps in the clearinghouse. But there's questions around, will permitting agencies receive funding for staff time to provide this data? No, there's no funding associated with this process. And then there's some other questions around existing data in SWRCB and if we can utilize that. Again, I will explore some of these questions and do some internal discussions and see if we can't get definitive answers back to you. But with that, I'd like to go ahead and, I guess, segue to the rest of the presentation so we can stay on schedule here. Does that sound okay?
Thanks, Jeffrey. Yeah, I think especially for the PWS ID for the state small systems that are in SWRCB currently, I think we can figure out a way to make that work. I think we'd look for counties to make sure we're validating the data that exists there, but we'll be in touch on that. I think that's a good point. Okay, I'm going to power through. I want to talk about the future. What Jeffrey has outlined for you is really just our interim stopgap procedure to kind of get us started with getting our basic inventories in place for the state small systems and domestic wells. But we want to make this a much easier, seamless process moving forward for you guys that isn't fully spreadsheet dependent, because we know that is can be a huge headache. So we are in the process of.
And Kristen,
yeah,
I'm not seeing your presentation right now. I think Gina, I'm seeing Gina's icon here.
Oh, I'm gonna.
I think you need to steal it back.
Steal it back. There we go. Thank you. Can you see my slides now?
Yes.
All right. So many technical difficulties for us on this webinar. All right. So we are building a brand new database system called the SAFER Clearinghouse that's going to be helping the Water Board implement the SAFER program, data management, program accessibility. We want to make sure that the data that we're getting in is validated and that it's easy to maintain and access for all of our partners. It is a huge, huge undertaking. I'm not going to go into all of the details here, but we are currently in phase 2 of development for the SAFER Clearinghouse, which does include the creation of an online portal that counties can use in order to submit and access the state small and domestic well data, both the inventory data and the water quality data that's going to be included. Right now, this is kind of what it looks like. It's a fairly basic system where you're able to look up water systems, and but we are currently working with our Department of IT to further refine the clearinghouse. What we have created so far to help us with this effort, and which Jeffrey is going to be using to validate the data that you provide to him, is this batch upload feature. So we can take those spreadsheet templates, and the reason why they are structured the way they are and we need them to be the format that they're in is to allow for this batch upload to take place. So no one has to do individual data field entry. We're able to batch upload each spreadsheet, and the clearinghouse will validate the data that's coming in. Is the water ID the right amount of digits? Is this a zip code? Is this an address? Is this in the right format to help improve data quality? Once that data is validated and we've assigned or made sure that the right unique identifiers are assigned to the state small and domestic wells, Jeffrey will send those spreadsheets back to you so you have that data. But what we're hoping to do is build out a new county portal to the clearinghouse so that you have the ability to do batch uploads if you'd like, and to maintain all of this data. So like Vicki and others had mentioned, if there is a well or a water system that is being deactivated or being destroyed, you can indicate that with a click of a button, or you could batch upload a list and we can make sure that our database is updated with the information that you're providing. This is a really basic flow of the data that's going to be coming into the clearinghouse. There is a very strong connection between the clearinghouse and SWRCB. So the state small data that you will be submitting through the clearinghouse will be pushed to SWRCB and maintained in SWRCB. And all of the water quality data submitted through the labs electronically starting next year will also go to SWRCB. Domestic well data will stay in the SAFER Clearinghouse, both the water quality data and the inventory data. So for those of you who are data nerds and like to look at data flow maps, you can definitely take a look at this. But what we're trying to do with the SAFER Clearinghouse is make it a lot easier for you to maintain and access this data. For those who are familiar with using SWRCB, it is can be a tricky system to use. So we're trying to create an alternative portal for you to maintain information that does eventually go into SWRCB. If you have more questions about this, feel free to contact me after this call. And this just kind of explains the process. I don't want to get into it too much, but if you want to know, what are the databases of records and where will the data be going within the water board, you can take a look at it. The point is that we want to create something that's easy for you to use starting next year. And so there are multiple steps for creating kind of an online portal for this data. And we want to identify some folks within the counties, those of you on the call and others who are interested in working with us to think through what this county portal should look like. We want to really create something that obviously works for us, but something that works for you too. Like, are there certain IT things that we can develop within this portal that's going to help you with managing your data on your end as well? Maybe I've heard some talk previously about like a registration system or other stuff. We are looking at, what are our options for connecting this to DWR's Oscar database. So we're trying to explore what our options are here, but we'd love to work with you guys, involve you in the development process from the very beginning. It doesn't need to be everybody. So if you're interested in working with us on creating this new county portal, please email Jeffrey and he'll add you to a mailing list so that we can start setting up meetings within the next few months to talk about the needs. So there's kind of, the 4 basic stages of an IT development process. We'll do some pre-development, which is thinking through the big ideas. What do we need? Then we'll actually build it. We need to do some beta testing and then we'll launch it. And the goal is to have this available by the end of the year so that we can start again meeting the deadlines within SB 200 so that we're collecting this data electronically starting next year. And a big piece of this is going to be this integration with CLIP, where these wells are submitting data to our new system, which then flows to us. So we can talk about that another time if you're interested in the data flows. Some of the big immediate needs we know are definitely aware of for the county portal. The ability to maintain that inventory. So like we said, if you have new wells that are coming online or you have ones that are coming offline, being able to say which ones are active or not active. We're going to be creating that data bridge, if you will, so that we can collect those water quality results directly from labs, accredited labs, starting next year. We want you to have the ability to obviously batch upload and validate data. And of course, we want you to be able to view the data and extract it for whatever purposes you need that data for. Potential future needs, potentially GIS mapping, connection with Oscar, and any other ideas that you might have. There's a new data system within the water board that's helping with the implementation of Sigma. That is a very cool GIS mapping tool, and I just shared some screenshots in the PowerPoint, but you can select a location on a map, and that will be the well location, and then you can actually highlight the areas where that water is being consumed or used in the area. But they have some pretty cool mapping features if that's something of interest for the county portal at a future date. Some big picture things that we're trying to think through for the county portal and our data needs is there's definitely a strong Sigma connection. We've had some GSAs reach out to us about this data collection effort, asking, when will this data be available? They need it for GSP planning, the groundwater sustainability plans, and implementation. And so, how can we collect the data and display it in a way that serves multiple purposes? Some talk of a well registration system that I think is connected with OSCR and others statewide. So we need a kind of a better statewide system. There's the CB SALT effort, trying to coordinate the water quality testing that's going to be happening there. And just even big picture wise, I think there's a lot of questions around, there's multiple efforts across the state at multiple levels of government and nonprofits working with especially domestic wells. And the question is, we get an inventory from each county, but let's say we have a partner or another part of the water board identifies a well that's not part of that inventory. What's the process for validating that well and getting it added to the inventory? Does the county need to confirm and validate it? Do we just add it to the system and inform the county, hey, we found, a domestic well that's in your county? So there's a lot of, especially in contact information in particular, we have staff who are reaching out to communities, sometimes hundreds of domestic wells in a community on a potential consolidation regionalization project. And we get a whole bunch of new contact information for those domestic wells. Do we update it in our system and share it with you guys? I think there's a lot of coordination and thinking through best practices as we move forward with maintaining this data. And we'd like to do that in partnership with you all. So I tried to get through that quickly because I'm looking at the clock. I think we have time for a few questions. We'll go over the hour just a bit, but I think it's worth our time. So Jeffrey, any questions in the chat box or any raised hands? Because I can't see any of that.
Well, going back to, I think, this exercise of submitting data, there's a question from Vicky that we can try to answer.
Yeah.
If a state small is having difficulty affording quarterly and annual testing due to COVID, not requiring payment for rents, is there funding available to assist with this issue? I assume that this issue being this process of submitting this data. But
I'm not sure if anyone from DFA is on the call or Andrew. Is Andrew on the call? I do know that there's the SAFER funds, the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund. There is funding for kind of general like O&M, which could potentially cover the cost of lab testing, but that would have to be explored further. So if you have a particular system in mind that may need some assistance, please contact us. We're happy to connect you with the right folks within DFA and get together and get a form together so we can see what options are available. I hope that helps.
Can I jump in there too?
Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, I would just say, we're focused a lot more on sort of water quality, Vicki. So I would bring this to your district engineer and then also Karen Nishimoto. And if it's resulting in a water quality issue, maybe there is emergency funding that could could be found, but if they're a disadvantaged community. So, I would say if you have those type of problems, you can send them to me, and then I will, since you're in Merced, I will pass that on to Karen Nishimoto. So this is Michelle Frederick.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Maybe time for one more question here. This one coming from Amy again regarding wells. So would this exercise be like us finding our abandoned wells and validating them in our inventory later on? Mostly they are abandoned and inactive, but they do get put back in service. Should these be included in the initial submittal? I would say my initial reaction is if they're currently considered abandoned or inactive, I don't see the need to include them in the initial submittal. I think they can be added in later on if they do become active again. There's another good question from Rebecca Lustig regarding the requirements for next year and the lab to submit the data. Do all the labs know to start submitting that data for state smalls and private wells, or are the local jurisdictions expected to notify the labs?
I think it's something that we'll probably want to address from both angles. We can definitely notify the labs, especially the accredited ones that we work with, to let them know of the new requirements, and especially because we have a new online reporting system coming on board for those labs called CLIP, which will be part of the outreach there. But I think it would be good coming from you all as well to let them know, and we'll definitely be working to develop guidance, training materials, FAQs, and I would appreciate your feedback on those as well as we develop them.
And then there's a question around the potential requirements around environmental health obtaining water quality data. And I just want to clarify that SB 200 does not add any requirements around new collection or actual monitoring requirements. It states that data that is in the possession of the local health officer or the other relevant local agency. So it's data that should already be in your possession. It does not have requirements to create new monitoring of those wells.
But if the data is buried in a PDF somewhere that may be hard to correlate, and it's 30 years old, is that still relevant data? That we're going to have to figure out how to mine and put into the spreadsheet.
So, Jeffrey, if you don't mind. So the SB 200 only requires water quality data going back to 2014. So if it's 30 years old, absolutely not. If you have it in a machine readable format and it's easy to share with us, we would not say no. But we would say no to a PDF, I think. I think a lot of you may have your water quality data in that format in PDF documents or even hard copies, and that's it. If that is data that you can put into the spreadsheets, it would be helpful. But we are not making that a requirement that you do that because it is not required in SB 200. We are looking for, at this time, data that can be put into those spreadsheets and shared with us so that we can start using it immediately. I hope that helps answer that question.
Yes, the counties are facing, it is, to face the scenario where you're looking at data in a PDF format or in a hard copy, and to migrate it into our machine readable spreadsheet for integration to our database, that does require resources and requires time. So we're trying to find that balance of how do we maximize this data collection and make it usable. But keep in mind that the more we can populate this data, and the more we can inform our needs assessment, the more we can try to find these small systems in need and consider things for, of course, additional improvements for access to that safe and affordable water.
And thank you, Jeffrey. Are there any other questions in the chat box, Jeffrey, or raised hands? We can stay on the call.
Let's see. Not seeing new raised hands. Chat box, feel free to throw in there. Michelle just sent out a reminder that clarifying that the statute goes back. It only requires data back to January 1st of 2014. Question from Christy Anderson. Are you saying that you only need data for domestic wells dating back to 2014? I think the answer to this is no. We want all domestic wells that you have data that you have in your inventory to identify them, and then the water quality data to be submitted that's associated with those needs to go back to 2014. But we still want to populate our inventory with all the available domestic wells you can identify.
I raised my hand. Oh.
Is there a hand raised?
Go for it.
Oh, hi,
Mark.
this is Mark Abbott with Riverside County LPA. I had a follow-up question for state small data submission. We understand it's from 2014 forward. So code requires you have one-time inorganic chemical analysis. We usually have it updated every 9 or 10 years, and we keep that. We don't have it electronically, but that's pretty easy to find and submit. If it's before 2014, which is going to be for a large percentage of our state smalls, do you want the most recent if it's older? Because some of that would be none as far as inorganic chemical. And then I'm assuming you don't need back T information for that time period, just inorganic chemical. Is that correct?
I would say anything prior to 2014 is not required. And so you are not required to submit that data. I'd say if you do have back T data that's from 2014 to current, we would want that submitted also. But really, that January 1st, 2014 is your date that you need to go back to. If you choose to go beyond that, we would welcome the data, but you're not required to.
Understood. And then I may have missed it because I thought it could be submitted as a PDF to you, but you wanted the ask will be within the body of the spreadsheet, correct?
Correct. It's going to be to get this volume of data into our clearinghouse, we need to have you all do that exercise.
And then it'll have the different constituents under Title 22 broken down to fill in. Is that correct?
There's a drop down in that analytes column that lists all 400 plus constituents.
Okay, very good. I understand now. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions?
Well, 14.
Oops.
I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat box. I'm not seeing any more raised hands.